Well, good morning. That was a most impressive website launch. I'm used to the sites I was involved with back in 1994. There was no audience when we launched a website, and no multimedia, and we've come a long way. I actually greatly appreciated the physical manifestation of the website in a frame, because I think it's important to remind us that these websites aren't off somewhere in cyberspace. They're actually part of real life. And the connection between what's online and what's in person is actually one and the same. Well, we've been doing very well with time this morning. That means that I get a few extra minutes. So in the next 40 or so minutes, we'll have a chance to have a bunch of slides, more slides than you probably want, and chance for questions and answers if I'm good enough to provide good answers. I'm going to talk about a bunch of stuff today. I'm going to introduce myself briefly. I'm going to define e-democracy, at least use my definition. A lot of you are elected officials here, whether you are a member of a youth parliament or a member of a local council or province. And you're the main audience today for a lot of these remarks. Tomorrow at the master class, I'll be having more comments geared towards civil servants. So I'm thinking politically today in many ways. I'm going to talk about leading applications. That's where all the slides come in. Basically, it's surfing with Steve. We're going to look at a lot of examples across the web and conclude. It was back in 1994. I was a graduate student working with the state government in Minnesota, a young pup, and I discovered this thing, the internet, a couple years earlier, and decided that this medium was going to mean a lot in politics. And I had a short term where I knew I was going to get a job back with the government again in the fall to work full time. But instead of finishing my final paper for my master's degree, I really should have done that. My wife says I should, but I started this project called Minnesota e-democracy. In fact, we built the world's first election-oriented website. We had candidate information, government information about elections, media information, an online candidate debate, an online citizen discussion. In fact, the most comprehensive election website ever, because by 1996, everyone had their own website. I put out an email, actually, and I said, hey, wouldn't it be fun? Wouldn't it be fun? We heard the word fun earlier, to do this, to put these candidates on this new thing, brand new thing called the World Wide Web. And I started getting calls from journalists all over the world. And I recall an Italian journalist saying, is this the end to politics as we know it? Big wide eyes. And my answer was pretty firm. No. I think we go through cycles of excitement and hype. And I've learned again and again that there's a secret right here. In the online era, set low expectations, or at least reasonable expectations, and declare victory. Back then in 1994, we said this is an experiment. We're going to learn from it. We're going to build from it. Because the most important thing with e-democracy and using the net for civic engagement is momentum. If you create an expectation that it's going to be a revolution tomorrow, that website is going to change everything, and it only changes some things, people are going to be disappointed. But it changed something. And so a lot of what I'll talk about are these somethings, these steps that we can take to connect citizens more closely to the government. We talked about trust earlier, and the cynicism that's out there, and it's out there. That's a real problem. I'm not going to talk about the problems. I'm going to assume that we're trying to find some solutions based on what we've already heard today. And I've built over years sort of the sense of what e-democracy is. Initially, everyone thought it was something in the future. And here's how I see it and work. This is my working definition. I think of it as the use of information and communication technologies, the internet, mobile, all the different kinds of media, by democratic sectors. And what I mean by that is not just the local council, but also political parties and interest groups, by the media, whether it's public broadcasting or commercial newspapers, the government, obviously, representative institutions, as well as the civil service, the administration, and the private sector. And it's happening at all levels. It's at the local level, at the state or regional level, at the national level, and with global politics. In many ways, the private sector plays a strong role in connectivity. I mean, without a consumer internet, without citizens consumers online, you really don't have citizens online. And so that's also where a lot of the technology is being developed that then feeds into all the different democratic sectors. The question is, what's missing, you know? And it's not so much that it's a future thing, it might be what kind of e-democracy do you have? And what I've found over the last decade is that the internet is much more likely to accelerate politics as is. So, example, if there's a lot of cynicism in politics and a lot of, as I said, not in my backyard type politics, we're making that faster and better. We're basically, if we're going down the slide, the tools used as is by our traditional political ideas will take us just faster down the slide. It isn't inherently going to be better without us thinking about how we make it better. How do we add value to democracy and basically intervene in the face of what traditional politics may do with this medium based on their own historical perspectives? And that's where citizens come in. I mean, well, we might be civil servants or politicians. We're also citizens in our countries. And we're the only ones, when we're out on the web, that actually interact with what all the different sectors are doing. We might go to the newspaper's website. We might go to the political party's website. These institutions are often acting very independently and don't think of themselves in relationship to one another. That we need to think about the citizen perspective and build upon that as we work to improve what e-democracy does. If I could have a glass of water, that would be wonderful. Someone could take care of that. Thank you. I spoke to staff at the U.S. House of Representatives. I have a little network of parliaments online, and I'm always very interested in representative institutions. So this is the second time I've used this slide, and sort of an adaptation of government and the citizen piece. One of the challenges for you as council members, as politicians, is that when these tools of information technology are being built into governance, are you just in a small connection with citizens and well connected to the administration, or are you in a deeper connection? I think it's a really important question. As you begin to invest in these tools, is it accenting and strengthening your role as representatives, or are you actually writing yourself out of the equation? What is your role in all these different tools as they're built in? And the reason I mention this is that in Canada, the federal government was going quite aggressively with what they call online consultation, building various platforms for federal agencies, federal departments to communicate directly with citizens. And members of parliament started getting upset about this. They said, well, that's our job. What ended up happening was, it was unfortunate because basically the members of parliament said they complained, but they didn't do anything about it. The federal bureaucracy backed off for about 2-3 years on e-democracy activities. And finally, some members of parliament realized, oh, it's not about stopping the departments from interacting with citizens. It's about basically I call competitive transparency. It's about making sure that we also, in our institutions, use these tools in our processes, just as other parts of governance will do the same. So I want to put that out there as just sort of a concept that, oh, water's right there. Well, see, now, it digitally appeared. They have this special machine that, all right. This is where I make all you jealous if you're actually thirsty as well. So let's get some examples on the table of democratic or representative institutions. I've actually been to Mongolia. They have a great website for their parliament. They use a lot of actually open source tools because they don't have very much money in Mongolia. And a mix of a poll. They even have discussion forums built into their site, which is very rare in a parliamentary website. But mostly, more important, they're just making the official documents of the parliament accessible in many ways for the first time. I mean, it's very difficult in a large country like that to get information out. Now, if you have a net connection, which is rare in Mongolia, you can get to this. And I call institutional e-democracy. The universities are online, the political parties are online, the NGOs are online. They just don't have citizens yet. But here, they're actually using the tools quite aggressively. Let's get really local. Here we have Boggs Township. It's like a parish, small township in rural Pennsylvania, and it says on their website, this is the face of democracy here, right? And it says over combined 64 years of service to local government. Not a lot of elective turnover on the township board in Boggs Township. We have presidents, we have prime ministers. They all have websites, right? And so here we have the Prime Minister of New Zealand, the Prime Minister of Japan, recently reelected. Or at the local level, here we have Mayor R.T. Ryback of Minneapolis, my hometown. I'm going to just point this out here. You'll see there's a link to the Minneapolis Issues Forum. That's something that edemocracy.org, the nonprofit that I'm involved with, hosts. And so we have a connection between the government and the citizen-to-citizen forum, which I'll highlight at the very end of the presentation. So we have individual political leaders, particularly like the executives in some ways that are online. Now the reality, particularly at a state or a national level, at the local level, local government websites are actually much larger in terms of eyeballs. They call it eyeballs. The people actually use the websites. But at the state level or the national level, it's the media that is the dominant provider of political information. They summarize things. They make it brief. They tell you what's supposedly most important. So here you have the BBC. But something to note about this: if they're the main citizen window, if you're in government, you want to make sure that they're linking to you. They need to have thought about their role as e-democracy contributors. Are they linking to the source material, or are they basically a gatekeeper? So here in the BBC, when they talk about this new policy in preschool, they actually link to the government unit that has the reports on that. In Minnesota, this is public radio, a very good site about the legislature. Here they actually contain a link to the live chamber debates in the legislature, which is actually provided by the government. So an example of linking. Now, a lot of media websites, you won't find links like that, and that's important to try to change. The United States is a leader online when it comes to raising money, trying to get votes, and making noise. So basically, online campaigning is really fairly sophisticated. And here you had George Bush's website, John Kerry's website, but maybe some of you may have heard about Howard Dean, raised a little bit of noise last election cycle. That is a real story. The campaign was faced basically with citizens who supported the candidate that used the tools around the campaign. And normally a campaign would be all about control and message. And the campaign with Dean decided to open it up and have a thing called a weblog, an online diary, a journal of sorts. I never expected that. I mean, I've been in this space for 10 years. I was surprised. And suddenly, John Kerry has a weblog, and all these candidates began to do interactive forums on their websites to allow their supporters to basically talk to one another. Something campaigns often just don't do, at least not publicly. And so there was something quite dramatic with this. The question I have is that if you can interact with citizens to get elected, will they then interact with citizens after they have power? And we haven't seen as much interactivity. Although the White House does have, once a month, a site called Ask the White House, and they have a guest, and you can do a moderated, they send in questions, and they pick the questions, and the minister will answer questions, not the president, but someone in the administration. So a little bit of interactivity. And then we have thousands or millions, really, of political groups, from political parties, MoveOn.org, which is a very active group. This group here in Minnesota, they do action alerts on trying to pass laws that allow people to carry concealed weapons in Minnesota. I mean, it is the United States. We like our guns, I guess. And this website actually was one of the most effective, the ugliest website you can imagine, but one of the most effective sites at coordinating a political campaign. And online petitions, you hear quite a bit about that. Here's the challenge. You hear a lot about this, and you look at a lot of websites. They say things like, speak out, have your say, sound off. The question is, with all these tools, particularly around online activism, we're raising a lot of e-noise. And that's what people do naturally with the net. But can we e-listen? We talked about listening earlier. I mean, are we building the tools in governance that allow those who have power or those who want to interact with citizens to actually interact in a way that allows us to make better decisions? And what I've pretty much found, at least in most places, is that we're not building tools to listen. We're building tools to make noise. And ultimately, if we want to make better decisions and have people build sort of long-term trust and the idea that the society is moving in the right direction, we also need tools to listen. It's not an either-or, but we need to think about tools for listening. So the challenge in governance, whether you're a representative or a civil service servant, is thinking about how we, invest in tools that allow us to make better decisions. I mean, a lot of times, the concern about a lot of these tools is that it'll make people hyper-reactive. You know, when people can activate, then the politicians will be less likely to make a controversial decision, because even though it might be the best one for the community, because the protests will be that much louder. And so you need to think about ways that what you did offline can work online in terms of people connecting. And I'll give some examples of that, but basically think of it like what's an online pub town meeting look like, different than just a comment form, you know? How is a meeting like this if we were interacting and having a discussion? What's the online version of that? So we're going to go into some examples. We've heard a lot in the early and mid-90s, late 90s about access. Initially it was, we have a lot of government information, let's dump it out there on the web and there's access. And I mean, let's face it, there is now more information from government available to people on demand than at any other time in history, you know, in terms of where they can get it from and being able to access it. The concept of accessibility, though, is growing again to say, well, finding the needle in the haystack isn't, you know, how do you do that? I mean, if you have lots and lots of information and people can't actually find what they need, what good is it? And so thinking about accessibility, in Poland they've been doing a lot of work with this. I encourage you to take a look at this report from the OECD, because they outline a whole bunch of things to think about in terms of making that access accessible. Another thing that we often miss, we've heard a lot about e-voting, and I think, you know, someday people will be able to vote remotely in some places. In other places, they'll decide that voting in a physical voting booth or voting by mail is more secure. I mean, it's really a choice for different places. But I've always had this fear that if you were able to vote online, there should at least be some websites that help you make an informed voting decision. Or even if you vote always on paper. You know, how is government, how is the media, how are we using these tools to actually allow people to make more informed choices? And particularly as you get down the ballot. And so South Korea is the leading country in terms of creating websites by the government to help educate voters. Here we had a youth website. This was they had two mascots. They had a female and a male rock singer. You could even send electronic cards, and if you sent an electronic card, it had a flash animation telling you how you could clean up politics. This is the youth site. And you know what? You could win a prize. Win a prize. Government needs to give away more prizes on their websites. If we're thinking about generating traffic, more prizes. You know, I think that's great. And then they also have the more official website. And in this case, what they did was they said no matter, every candidate on the ballot, no matter what party they were, had basically 8 fields of information. A candidate's statement, some campaign finance information. It also had things like their tax record, which is public, I guess, crime record, and other things that government had, all from one site. And you could quickly, you know, click on that map and find it. They even collected video statements from every candidate in the same format. So it was uniform, it was authoritative, and they had an official web link to the candidate website. Now, in some places, people will actually spoof. They'll make fake candidate websites, you know, making fun of a candidate. Well, as a citizen, you type into Google, right? That's how you find everything, Google, right? And if you go to the wrong website, what if you decide you actually want to, was that the right website? Who's collected a list of where the official candidate websites are, or where the official party websites are? So it's important to display those linkages, and then you can link off, like here, from here, to the official candidate website, which was obviously a little more pleasing than the standard site, but still, most governments do not collect anything more than the name of the candidate and the party name. Now, I wanted to mention another thing. I know mobile technology is of interest. There are governments, I'm trying to think, it's Fareham. There's a council in the UK that actually allows you to use your mobile to send in pictures of like holes in the street, graffiti, those types of activities, some e-service applications. Very innovative use of mobile technology. In South Korea, they have James Bond music playing on this animation. There's some politicians trading some money. And it shows a youth or someone how to take a picture if you catch a violation of the election law, and then how to send it into the, oops, I pushed the wrong button there. Okay, how to send it into the election authorities. And something different, unique. It helped when I stopped by South Korea and they actually like gave me a tour of these websites because I don't read Korean, so it's helpful. So if you have anything in the Netherlands or any of your countries, just show it to me, and then I can put it into one of my slides for a future presentation. One of the things about Iceland's a small country, and they've actually put together a very good parliamentary website. And basically, it's what's on now. So when you go to their homepage, it's all database-driven in the background. It's what's happening in the parliament that day. And in some ways, the parliament is now more accessible online than in person because the meetings actually never were public, although if you asked to go, you could, but no one really did. Now they actually have a lot more reports out online, and it's opening up their process in that way. And it's a very interesting example of how they're taking the representative process and making it more accessible. Here's Minnesota, where I'm from. I'm going to take a minute here and just kind of dig into this. But basically, here you have the chamber. Every member has a laptop that they take back and forth to their office and to committee meetings, although they normally don't use the laptop in committee meetings because they're supposed to listen in committee meetings. But in the chamber, they might be there for 6 hours during debates. There's lots of procedural things happening. So they're doing research, they're responding to email, they're communicating with their staff. In fact, people have often said, you mean they can do email in the chamber? And they're also on television at the same time, so that's, it's all very interactive. Well, in the past, if you were a paid lobbyist, you could go to the side door, get a page, which would be like an intern, and give them a note on a blue piece of paper, and the page would walk it into the chamber and give it to the member of our legislature, and they would come out to the outside and they would meet with that lobbyist. What's the difference between sending an email from across the state compared to a lobbyist who has money being able to have a little in-person meeting? And so basically it's just extended our past processes. Now, most chambers do not have internet in the chamber. There are many stories of members during debates doing research to correct the record, and they push the microphone. I just looked up on this website, your statistic was wrong. And so it's very much interactive. They have video on the internet. The minute an amendment is proposed, the second an amendment is proposed, and they're passing it out on paper. Members also get it on their laptops. They often like the paper, it's quicker to scan. But then for the big ones, they do keyword searches, so they make sure that if an amendment is thick, that they can quickly get to that section to see if anyone's trying to mess with their part of the bill. But it's online immediately. So basically, you could be, across town or across the state, and whatever is actually being physically distributed in terms of amendments, you can see it right there. And then that's an example of sort of a bill and the status. So it's just the most sort of wired chamber. Another issue, I know we're talking at some parliaments here, but just apply it down locally. When I was talking to the federal government in Canada, I asked them, well, are the committee meetings in Parliament public? They said, oh, no, I don't think so. And I went to the Parliament and presented to them. I said, well, I know your meetings aren't public. Yes, they are. Oh. And so then I said, well, where are they on the website? And so we went onto the website, and I had to click 6 times from the homepage to find the committee schedule. And now, it just so happens that the most popular thing that the Minnesota legislature puts out is the committee schedule. And so in the new redo of the Canadian Parliament website that came out about a year ago, here it is, schedule of meetings. And the whole idea that if you have representative processes that are public, make them visible online. I mean, it's not that you have to change them necessarily, just make them visible. So here they have webcasting and various documents. Very important. So now they've realized they have to let people know that the committee meetings are accessible. It's a strategy of the Australian Parliament as well. All the media coverage tends to focus on these sharp debates at the end of the process in the main chamber, and so they've actually set up email alerts for the media and other things to get try to encourage the media to actually cover the committee meetings, because that's where the more substantial deliberative part of the process occurs. Now, I don't know if Jan Hamming is still a counselor in Tilburg, but I've been carting his slides, his images around the world with me. And the main reason is I think of his website is what I call a virtual office. When you go to his website, you can see his public schedule. He does weekly chats online, and a lot of times chats online aren't as effective as you might like them to be, particularly with politics. But what he does is every other week, he does one week he does a coffee meeting, and he has 5 or 6 people. And then on the other week, he'll do a live chat at 7 p.m. every Sunday night or Monday night, whatever time it is, and he'll have 5 or 6 people. So basically for him, engaging with constituents in small groups, he does it, and he has an email newsletter. He sends out a note saying, the topic this week in the chat is this, or this week we're going to meet at this library or this coffee shop. And he just uses it in an integrated way. And so when I think about walking into, if a politician has an office, but I think about walking into an office like in the U.S. Congress. There's there's a reception desk, there's some staff back there, there's a TV monitor going there, there's magazines and handouts and position papers. When you walk into a website, do you get a similar experience? And that's what this website does. It makes the politician more accessible. His other members of the council all got jealous, and they said, well, we want nice websites too. And so the administration then provided a platform for all of them. Although you can have a platform, but if you don't use it, it's maybe not so good. And so in some cases, the training side, encouraging council members to integrate it into the way they do their work is actually challenging work, but important. In Winona, this is a small town where I grew up. This is the city council page. It's just the name, no links, phone number, and an email address, and then only the mayor has a picture and a little bit of detail. That's what a lot of local governments have. I mean, their council is just a name. Often they'll stick a small bio. In the Minnesota House, they've created what I call a toolkit, where every member gets exactly the same page, but you get their photo, you can click right into the databases of all the different legislation that they've authored. We obviously have a much more individualistic political system, so the individuals have more things tied to them than to a party. The map of the district, some information about the district, news and views, that's where you can get their press releases, and here they are right here. And there's this thing called RSS, and I'll just mention it quickly. It's just some headlines, and it allows someone to monitor the website more easily. Some new technology. And email updates, and even a video interview. They have a television station for the legislature when it's in session, and so they've taken the interviews. And so here you can actually go in and see, get a sense of for multimedia, as the word was mentioned. Again and again, we talk about access and accessibility. There's a lot of information out there. Well, the reality is that probably the most cost-effective e-democracy investment that you can make is email notices. When a citizen knows about something, when they can do something about that information, that's politically empowering. It's not changing what's public or private or confidential, but when it's public, letting citizens kind of get an alert about it makes all the difference. So in St. Paul, for example, I call it dissemination instead of access. There's like 400 different documents that change once a year, once a week, once a day on the city website. And they've indexed all the documents that change on a regular basis. And then when it changes, it automatically, the civil servant, and they distributed the publishing rights, so lots of different people upload things to the website. So when they put the council minutes on the website, the 1,147 people who said, send me a copy, the minute it's put up there, get a copy. Before they'd look at the stats, and they maybe see the stats maybe a month later, 2 months later, and they'd see 200 people looked at it. And their job was to put it out on Friday, but they're like, well, it's only 100 people. I'll do it Monday. Now they know, at Friday at 4 o'clock, if it's not up by then, there are 1,000 people who expected that email, and they didn't see it. And so this is a really important strategy tool, and this is a tool from a company called GovDocs that built this. And there's other ways that you can use email notices. On the other, there also are, my local city councilor has an email list where she's collected emails of all the different, many people from meetings, right? So she has 1,000 email addresses of people. And so she sends out an email and does it like a newsletter. Well, often she gets lots of replies. It's a private exchange going on back and forth. And that's important. It's good to have an email newsletter as an elected official. But over time, we're beginning to see politicians and administrations becoming overwhelmed, and often not by constituents, but by non-constituents, people who live outside the district, or in many cases, just the same old spam that everyone receives. So in Menlo Park, they've created a system where 90% of the queries that are coming in are about services. You can do a complaint or a compliment. You can choose complaint or compliment, or of your choice, about garbage service, missed pickups. And so you can choose from a menu. And what they do then is they sort the email through or the message through and get it right to the right department. And what's important about getting the 90% of service queries to the service people is that then the 10%, which are more policy-oriented queries, can go to the council members, can go to the managers, to the mayors. And you can also choose, I want an email reply, I want a telephone reply, or just send me a letter. I often would ask, no reply required. In some cases, just send me a confirmation. Say, yes, it's been received. And sometimes that's good enough for citizens, particularly if they're involved in petitions online. Why spend all this time doing a long note back when if a citizen gives the option and says, yeah, just confirm that you heard me. Just say, yes, you heard me. I don't need you to do more. Yes?
How does that work if you address, I want to get a phone call back? How many people actually use that option?
I'm not sure what the percentages are. I would say most are email. I'll just guess, and I'm just trying to, it's probably 10% phone call. But what it is in that case, it's a system where the city people can log in and see where the correspondence is, but so can the citizens. So if their message has been moved from the transportation department over to a different department because that was where it was meant to go, they can actually see it in the process. So it actually has this odd dual transparency around their service communication. But yeah, so you obviously have to put your phone number in if you wanted a phone call back. But it's an interesting service, and it's worth exploring. In the Philippines, we actually have heard this president has had some trouble recently as well, and people were turning. Well, I don't know if you've heard about this, but when the former president was basically kicked out of office through public protests because of corruption. And people used text messaging to organize 1 million people in the square. I met one of the elected officials, and he said that, when you're in a crowd of 1 million people, getting a text message from your friend saying, I'm next to this light pole, come meet me here, works really well. And the first message came out said, come to the square. All right, 1 million people, go home, come back, we won. And so this vice president became the president of the Philippines. And so she realized that, so people are really texting a lot here. I better receive text and listen to text messages from people. And so it's one of the few presidents or prime ministers that I'm aware of that has aggressively said, text me. So a very important example. I mentioned email newsletters for my city council member, 1,000 people, which is great. Also, the Prime Minister of Japan has 2 million people, and just a little bit more about email newsletters. An email newsletter is different than a notice. A notice would be, a document has changed, you can download it. An email newsletter is like once a week or once every 2 weeks or once a month where you decide, I'm going to tell someone what's new. For counselors, I would recommend this. For your general website for the whole city, recommend that they have a once a month or once every other week email newsletter that is sent out at the same time, the same day of the week, well edited, that tells people what's new on the website. If you're doing a small project and someone comes to your website and they can't say, this is my email, tell me what's new, you've lost the ability to create a relationship. Because the problem is that people have surfing habits. They go to Google, they go to a major news website. But for them to consciously think, okay, there's this new little e-democracy project in my neighborhood, I'm going to go to it because I've turned my computer on, it's very difficult. They'll go to it once when they get the flyer about it or hear about it. So you want to make it easy for them to say, I call it above the fold. It has to be, you can't scroll, it has to be somewhere in the top part of the page. Email updates. So as a council or counselor, if your council has a large email newsletter and has like thousands of people that have subscribed over time, then every new little e-democracy thing or big e-democracy thing or e-service item that you put out, you now have a cost-effective, almost free way to tell your users, hey, come check out our new online consultation on transportation, whatever. That and click here. That is very, very important. And so most of the traffic on the Prime Minister of Japan's website is Thursday and Friday. And I don't know for the webmasters in the crowd here, but I find that Tuesday is about 10 a.m. is the big traffic day. People get their email, they're getting out of it on Monday, it's finally Tuesday, they've caught up a little bit, and that's when they do a little extra surfing. And so they've changed the natural hit path. They get it on Thursday and Friday, so they've actually demonstrated that they can bring more viewers into the website. It makes it worth putting the stuff online. The other area that's beginning to emerge is blogs. In the US, you hear a lot about political blogs. There's a lot of pundits, people who kind of would love to be on television yelling at other people. That's not what all blogging is. Blogging can actually be an elected official being in a more civil tone, communicating with their constituents. In this case, we have an MP in the UK, Tom Watson, who's a backbencher and is sort of a newer MP, talking about what's happening around the Parliament and different issues in his constituency. In this case, it's a very unique blog. This is in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. This is the top civil servant. We have a city manager system where the council has maybe 5 members, a mayor, and I'd include the mayor. It's often very small councils, and they elect or they hire the chief civil servant at their pleasure to serve them. And he has a blog, and he'll talk about things like there's a new development that we've approved recently. Here's some pictures of it, and he's now got the fire chief and the police chief blogging as well. And they have to be careful. They're not political in many ways. I mean, it's political in the sense that it's policy related, but they're not party people, and so they have to be careful to communicate in an official manner. But it's great. I've often asked him, well, isn't the mayor jealous? He's like, no. I mean, they think it's fine. In many other situations, the idea of a civil servant blogging would be more controversial, but it's working here in Eden Prairie. Something that I mentioned earlier, I mentioned online consultations. This is something that a lot of administrations are doing. And so I want to point this out because I think it's actually one of the exciting applications that you see online. So if you have a department, for example, that has issued a report on, in this case, green living, right? They might put up a PDF file. People can download it. Hopefully it's not too long, but people will have to print it in this case. But one of the things you'll find is that if you just have an open comment box or just an email box saying, send us comments, you get lots of stuff that might not be easy to add up, to tabulate. Here they took the time to say, okay, we're going to ask, what are your top 5 priorities after reading this report? To be able to create some numbers is really important. So the more structure you put into it, don't overwhelm people with millions of questions, but a handful of questions. This gives you something that can be quantified. Because when you fill out the open box at the bottom, that's very qualitative, and it takes a lot more time to analyze that. So that's an example. The government that has been the most advanced that I have found with online consultation is the government of Queensland, a state in Australia. And you can go in there and you have different topics. So they had a consultation on tobacco and whether they should have different laws about tobacco. And it actually said if you're a healthcare worker, answer these questions. If you are a citizen, here are questions for you. And it allowed you, instead of having to read like a big, thick report, it said, after you've read that chapter, here are some questions you can answer. So it allowed you to sort of not have to read the whole thing. Because that's one of the problems with these big, giant reports online. They're just too long. In fact, if something is more than like 2-3 pages long, people will have to print it out to use it, and you've lost a lot of people. So those executive summaries are really important. And so here then, you can not only can you answer specific questions A, B, C, D, or do open-ended questions, you can choose, as someone who's answering, share my answers with others, or keep them private. And so you always can see then, after you answer it, whether what percentage you are compared to everybody else has already taken the survey. So it's a live results system. And then you can see all the open-ended comments that other people left who decide to share them. Terrific example of the system. In Issy, in France, suburb of Paris, something that they do is really interesting is they have an anonymous citizen panel where people volunteer. It's not scientific in the sense that it's randomly selected. People come onto the website and say, I would like to be part of the e-citizen panel, or the citizen panel, and here is some demographic information about myself, male, female.